Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Maurer, and I'm the Worship and Creative Arts Pastor here at Maple City Chapel. I want to welcome you to today's podcast. We recently wrapped up our sermon series, Not Alone, a series on mental health, and today is the final episode in the corresponding podcast series. For today's conversation, our lead pastor, Dr. J. Shetler, sits down with Joe Miller, our Care Connections and Missions pastor, Jordan Pearson, our student pastor, and myself, and we tackle the topic of men and mental health. We cover a variety of issues surrounding what men are challenged with in today's society. So let's jump into the conversation now. Here's Pastor Jay.
All right, well, we've been in a sermon series called Not Alone, a series on mental health, and we've talked about various topics in our podcasts connected to each of the messages. And the very last one we're doing is on men and mental health. Joe, you brought that message, and so looking forward to the chance to sit down today, and this really is going to be an unscripted, informal conversation about masculinity, about some of the challenges that men face, and looking forward to hearing just each of your perspectives. Often when we talk about stuff, there's some things in this that may be, I don't know, a little controversial, or we may even have different opinions on stuff, and one of the things I think we like to say at Maple City is that's okay. Like we want to talk about stuff, and if there's differences, there's differences. But I was so looking forward to this topic, this conversation. I think it's such an important conversation to be having about men and masculinity. And I thought we'd maybe start off, Joe, talking about some of the things that you brought up in your message. You quoted Saint Irenaeus, "The glory of God is man
fully alive,"
and it is part of a tattoo that I have on my. Fully alive is just a word that has come to mean a lot. Obviously, this is second century. Man means men and women to him, but it's an important. What does it mean for me to be fully alive as a man and to live out my God-given identity? And a couple of things that you talked about specifically is emotional expression in relationship. It's hard for us as men to be fully alive if there isn't some relational connection and if we can't express our emotions. So I thought we'd start there. And just, I'd love to hear from each of you, maybe with the emotional expression part, like what kind of messages did you get as boys and men about emotional expression? And then maybe we'll get to what is it like for you today as a man in terms of your own emotions and expression?
As far as childhood, I grew up in a very stoic family, didn't express, which is kind of funny because most people that know me, I'm very loud, very expressive with my, at least my demeanor, not necessarily with my emotions, which is quite a different thing. But yeah, I was raised without a dad, so I never saw a man kind of demonstrate deep emotional authenticity. So spent a lot of time in my mom's family, and the Slaybaws can be very stoic. It's all about work. It's all about hard work on the farm. Don't talk about our feelings.
Yeah.
So definitely something that, and then I'm the loud one. Nobody's talking in general in our family. We're pretty quiet. And yet then there's Joe, who's loud and always making noise. And, but I could tell early on that there's a big difference between talking a lot and actually expressing your genuine emotion. That's very different.
I love that distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any others? Like, how were you guys?
I would have a very similar experience to Joe, I think, very stoic, emotionally speaking. Like there was never a squashing of emotions. Like they didn't say, hey, you shouldn't be expressing that at all, but there was just no one ever expressed them as far as the men in my life. Like my dad was a pretty stoic guy. I think I saw him cry once growing up, it sticks out in my mind because I remember that one time when I was young. Now, as he has gotten older, he's become much more emotive. But then my grandpa on both sides were also very stoic in the sense of expressing like deep felt emotion. Like, grandpa says, I love you or whatever, but not a lot of like deep heartfelt emotion happening. So it's been a developing thing for me to develop in my life to actually be able to express with my kids, and change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say the same. Mine was pretty close to yours, Jesse, where, my parents never, squashed that in us. In fact, they said, this is a safe place to do that. Mm-hmm. But my parents are very the same way. They don't really show. My mom probably more than my dad. Mm-hmm. Again, I've seen my dad cry. I could count him on one hand. Times I've seen him cry. Mm-hmm. But it was always a safe place as a home where if there was something going on, like it was okay to share that, and which was completely different than the culture around me, what was being taught at my age, and what that looked like. And so it was always kind of confusing for me to know, like, okay, the world's saying one thing, but my family's saying it's okay. Like, what's the truth here?
Did any of your families, like I would say my family, like we weren't taught overtly about emotions. It was like we didn't talk about it. My parents didn't say it's okay to express emotion, or it's not. But it would just, I learned through the modeling, the lack of emotional expression, much more than, like, I didn't grow up hearing my parents, either of them, say, "Hey, boys don't cry." Like they never said that.
Right.
Yeah.
But there was, the boys didn't cry so much around me. You know, like it was more of a modeling thing than a overt teaching kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that was very much my experience. You know, it was never said don't cry. You know, don't express emotions. Now, strong emotions like anger, like that. Now, that was definitely like, no, we don't do that. We don't lose control of our anger. We don't get angry. We don't show this, you know, outrageous emotion. So it was almost like a leveling, like, don't have this in your emotional life. It's kind of like stay here, you know, steady, rock steady. Like that was probably more the modeling, and even the instruction I got is like, a man is rock steady. Like even if this is what's going on inside, this is where you live, you know, and you don't. So yeah,
that's, I think, a really important note, and I wonder how much of that is unique to maybe our culture. I don't know. Like when I look at, traditionally, men would be more affirmed in being angry. Like that's okay. Anger is the one emotion, guy, because it makes you feel tough and strong.
It's tied to strength,
Tied to strength. But I think and certainly in my Christian background, I would say the same thing. Anger was like there was something about just no ups. It was more the steadiness that was really what was valued, maybe.
I think for one thing I appreciate was my family was more of getting to the heart of what's behind the emotions and the feelings that you're having. So if you are crying or you are angry, like, why? Let's get to the heart of it, because it might be that you're upset about something that's worth getting upset about, or it's worth something to be sad about. And it was always a safe place to be able to talk about what's really going on, instead of just being like, oh, don't be angry, like, calm down. It was more of like, okay, let's get
What's behind the emotion?
what's behind it. And then if it is something where it's like, okay, you're just being a child, calm down, or it was like, no, okay, yeah, that's something we need to address, whether as a family or as an individual. And so that was one thing I really appreciated, because it helped me to see, like, sometimes our emotions can be all over the place. They can be rooted in truth, and they can be rooted in all kinds of things. But really finding out what's at the heart of things, that really helped me to be able to navigate, especially as a kid.
I definitely think our family of origin has a lot to do with it, but clearly culture affected us so much as well. And I mean, where are the heroes? There's no heroes in the masculine world for that. Not that I can think of, no heroes that really demonstrate that deep level of masculine vulnerability. All the heroes are just the emotionless kind of men that just go life alone and grut it out and defeat the enemy all by themselves. And we just don't have in our society like examples of really what we're hoping for as Christian men. Men who are deeply, what I talked about a lot on Sunday was deeply relational, but also deeply emotional and connected to their emotions in a way that they aren't afraid to express them. Vulnerability isn't weakness, and it is a sign of strength. And so just as a society, like, where is the example? Not just where's the example in our home, but where is it anywhere in society?
yeah.
But
It definitely feels like, I mean, that's part of how society works, that the rules kind of change over time. So if I look at my dad's generation, like, there definitely was some expectations, I think, around stoicism. I sometimes go back, I think it was John Watson was an early psychologist who wrote a parenting book that talked about the danger of mother love and the danger of being too emotional with your kids. You shouldn't say I love you to them. You shouldn't hug them, pat them on the head when you send them to bed. And it was a sense that if that stuff is just dangerous somehow. So clearly you wouldn't get a parenting book written about that today. People trying to be good parents were doing those things, and then later so when you think of, like, three of us here have kids and are parents, have you been intentional in any way as you parent? For you, maybe it's the youth you interact with or others, but to be sensitive to trying to cultivate something in your boys around their emotions and health. I remember very early on, some in-laws that we were visiting, and Michael, my son, started getting a little teary, and an uncle was like, boys don't cry, boys don't cry. And I just remember getting this like, oh, I don't want him to hear that message. And because we were working really hard not to, teach that message. But how's it affected your parenting, interacting with a younger generation?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is, with my boys especially, trying to cultivate this environment where they feel free to talk to me. And especially as they're going through middle school and early high school, I just remember so many days they'd come home and I'm starting to ask them about their day and what they experienced. And they're just so short with their words. They'll answer, but no description. Then in contrast with my daughter, I knew what all of her friends said that day. I knew everything. I knew who made who mad. I knew everything about her life. And girls are just so different. But really trying to draw out of them this safe environment where we could talk. And I also remember just a deep intentionality about saying I love you frequently. And in later years, especially early in high school, some of that I love you turned more into the language of I'm proud of you, because there's something that I think is important in the heart of man to not only know that they're loved, but that their dad is proud of them. And so those have been some things that I've been deeply intentional about at least with my two boys. But
yeah, it's been a challenge for me to try to balance that. I think I try my best to kind of like what you were saying in your upbringing, where I'm trying to like, okay, what are we upset about? It's okay to have big emotions. It's okay to feel the way that you feel. And I really try to stress that, like how you feel. I want to validate how you feel, but then get to the why do you feel this way, and kind of like avoid losing control of your emotions, but also make sure that I validate how they feel. So like my children are younger, so I have 10 and younger, 3 boys. So they're in the big emotion, like I'm going to throw the biggest, tantrum or whatever, like, and not to say they're always throwing fits, but trying to teach them like, feel how you feel, but let's process this and let's think through it. Think, why do you feel the way that you feel? And try to think, okay, if this is a small thing, we have smaller emotions about it. If this is a big thing, let's have bigger emotions about it, but let's not have this grandiose expression of emotion if my brother took my pencil, right. But if I'm really upset about that somebody attacked me or bullied me, like that's an okay thing to like, let's have some big emotions, but let's process through it together. Yeah. So that's one thing that I've tried to do, and I don't know that that's right, but that's just how I've been trying to cultivate it with my sons.
Yeah, I definitely think, that part of the shift in parenting is trying to talk more about emotions and trying to help kids understand their emotions. I don't know that happened for me growing up, and there's something about just creating a safe space where people can process and talk about their emotions and learn how to handle that in a healthy way, for sure.
So what about your kids who grew up with a clinical psychologist as a dad?
Funny story, maybe. I don't know if it's funny or not. I still feel like I remember at one point, Beth's pregnant with Michael, our first, and we're laying in bed, and I just got super emotional. And I said, it doesn't matter how hard we try here, because the rules change. Like you put this emphasis on something, like that parenting book I was talking about. And then 20 years later, it's like, oh, that was the wrong thing to do. That's making it, we're like, our kids are going to be in therapy. It does, it's like, it was kind of this fatalistic, like there's no hope. We're going to screw them up. But I think part of what we found over time is how resilient kids are, that you don't have to be a perfect parent, but when you're engaged and attentive and you follow up and you like, just be a space where you can have this conversation with them. And I think one of our kids are now older and out of the house, and to say that we have a really strong friendship with our adult kids is one of the things I'm more proud of than about anything else. So, but speaking of kind of that friendship stuff too, that was the other thing you talked about on Sunday, Joe, and I think they go hand in hand. I mean, the more kind of emotionally open and engaged you are, I think the deeper relationships can go. And so if men are more naturally suppressed emotionally, it's going to be harder to have deep conversations and vulnerable conversations and things. So what are you guys' thoughts on Joe's point there about men often lacking relationships, especially deep relationships where they talk about deep things? And what's it been like for you personally, maybe?
I think, being in student ministries over the last 20 years, I'm beginning to see a shift even just in the students. As, the talk of mental health is becoming more of a norm now, thankfully, that we're seeing a lot more of students being able to just be open or desire to be open. In fact, just this past weekend with our junior high missions trip, they had a sharing time afterwards where kids were able to share what God's been doing in their hearts. And afterwards, we just kind of had our own little debrief. And I had, a couple of the guys just kind of say, it's like, why is it that, our culture is one that says it's not okay to cry? Like, and, they were just sharing some really deep personal things. And like that group became so tight, because of what they were sharing and their support of each other, and that they were beginning to realize, like, why aren't more people doing this? Because, 10, 15 years ago, students would never do that. They never talk about, the deep things that's going on, and especially in front of a lot of people. It was maybe with individuals but here they were beginning to really realize, like, hey, like, this is good, this is healthy, and this is beneficial. And so I'm starting to see a little bit of shift in that students are beginning to realize that this is actually a good thing. And so for me, I see is my role is to help them to navigate that, help them to understand, like, our emotions and what's a healthy way to deal with them, and how to be able to just simply share and be open and vulnerable with each other. And when people are vulnerable with you, how to be able to be empathetic and sympathetic, and to listen and not judge, and just be a loving listening ear in some cases. And I'm beginning to see, like, there's beginning to be a little bit of a shift there. And it's kind of exciting, because I'm starting to see, like, the relationships are beginning to build. And I'm seeing, like, in student ministries, and not just in our area, but around, there are students who are wanting authentic relationship. They don't want the big hype. They don't want the big shows. They want relationships. And I think the more that students begin to see that sharing what's deep and down inside of us is part of that, I think that's when we're going to start seeing students begin to really flourish. But we have to be able to help them navigate that time, and what's healthy and appropriate, and sometimes, because you have those kids who just overshare. Right? But, that's one of the things I've noticed in the last few years, especially, that's it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think the statistic, as I was preparing for the message on Sunday, I was just looking online to look for research on men in our culture right now. And the statistic that broke my heart the most is that 1 out of 6 men in our culture have 0 close friends in their life. And 0 is in this case, a big number. Like 0. Nobody in their life that they could be real with, be honest with. And 1 out of 6 is many of us. And I think, if I remember the numbers right, 50% of men had 3 or less. And so that, I just, in my mind and in my heart, I just felt this deep ache for men who are walking life completely alone. And in my own, you asked about our own journey. I just remember, as my early 20s, I had relationships were one of the biggest priorities in my life. I spent a lot of time with my friends. I'd work, but friends were this big deal. It was who I was. I was deeply connected, and the bonds were so important. And I remember getting deep quickly, and then life changes, in the early 20s, and then getting married, having kids. Still had a lot of friends, many of the same friends from my early 20s. We'd camp together, we spent life together, we did so many things together, and just naturally, now in my mid 40s, I'm seeing their faces, and yet the quantity of time spent together just diminishes over time. And while I would not say I'm one of those 1 in 6 that have 0 friends, but life is busy. I'm pursuing things that I think are important. I'm caring for my family, and I'm investing in the lives of my kids with the few years that I have left with them in my home. And deep, meaningful friendships aren't the priority naturally the way they once were. And
Becomes a challenge.
it does, yeah, and it has to be so on intentional and on purpose, and because they just won't happen by accident.
And I love that was kind of how you said, like, no one's just going to hand you a group of friends, like you said on Sunday. And it's so true, because I was the same way. Being that I married late in life, early in ministry, I was just lived alone by myself, and I spent so much time pouring into others. I never had anybody pouring into me, and I just felt like this constant draining. And I came to a point where I began to realize that same thing. I was just expecting that, people would reach out to me, or where I had to say, like, no, I have to be the one who's going to make this happen. And that means I have to go out of my way. I have to, make that a priority. And once I started doing that, it was just like, not only just for me personally, but even I began to see in my ministry, things begin to change when I had those people who were there that I could just be open and real with, where they were also like, you know, calling out things in me that they were seeing, like, hey, you know, you need to work on this. And I was like, I never knew that. And so I love that picture that you painted. It's like, no one's just going to hand you a group of deep, intimate relationships. Like, that's intentional. You have to prioritize that. And that's going to take work because, again, you have so many things, whether it's family and work and all those things. Like, it's going to take a challenge, but that challenge is so worth it.
Yeah, I think that the challenge that you're seeing with the young men that are trying to foster this, like, if we can model this as adults, that will be one of the biggest supports to them, is like if they can see dad or the student pastor or whoever these guys in their life that are older, far, like more mature, whatever, doing this thing, then they'll say, oh, it can be done. Like, I can do that too, even past high school and even into college and even post-college. I've been blessed with a couple of guys that I met in college, and we've stayed tight over the years. And I'm probably the youngest one here, so I haven't quite got to the point where it's like, it's a complete split, but I can, like, over the last 2-3 years, as I've hit my early 30s, like, now they are married and have a couple of kids, and now they're married and have a job, and now I've bought a house, and like I've got 4 kids now, and like just as the same exact thing you described, there's just a spreading out of time and resources, and I don't have infinite amount of time, you know, infinite amount of resources, all those things that it takes, and so the intentionality has to be there for you to, like, it has to be a priority or it will not be. Like, it has to be. But yeah, that has been a huge area of growth for me, is keeping that. There's 3 or 4 guys that's like, we stay tight and we have those tough conversations. Like, we laugh because, like, sometimes we'll get together and be like, okay, we're each going to point out something in the other guy that's most annoying. And like, it's a dangerous conversation. It's a very dangerous conversation. And you have to do that with the right people. Yeah. But like, it's such a growing experience, and it's that ironing, sharpening iron. Like, and we talk about, you know, it's a scripture, but it's just like one man to another helping us all grow together. And it's so important.
I remember when I became lead pastor, an older pastor said to me, when you're lead pastor, you can't have any close friends. Like, that was part of his advice to me. It was this sense of, I don't know, I still don't fully grasp like that, but that it was a typical generation. Like, you're kind of on an island, you have to kind of protect your image, you can't be too chummy with your own church. And I just remember thinking, that is not the path I want to walk at all. Like, I do not want to go, like, just, I think leaders who become isolated, it's a dangerous place to be.
Right.
And so what does it look like for us to cultivate? And the emotional expression of vulnerability, risk-taking, it goes together. Yeah. It's so easy, I think, for us as men, to hang out and just have casual conversation. Right. I think of, you know, I love to golf, play golf with guys. I can go golf and come back, and Beth will ask me questions about how's so-and-so doing. I'm like, I don't know that we even talked about anything other than the golf swing for that day. So trying to force myself to go deeper with guys in those, you know, golf, just like ask at least one question. That's, you know, how's your marriage? You know, how are you doing with your kids right now? One of the things I've tried to do is set up like monthly meetings with, try to keep 3 guys that I meet with once a month that have some kind of mentoring relationship with me. Some of it's kind of mutual. When I was in my psychology practice, there was a business guy that I needed business mentoring. So it was sometimes just practical things like that. Are there things like, how do you try to push yourself to go deep? Like, what do you do to keep those, to try to make those relationships deeper? Because I think we have to work at it, because it's not natural.
I think it's part of it is just the art of a good question. And I think I have enough of a pastoral heart that I genuinely care about the lives of other men in my life. And so it's really easy for me to ask the hard questions. The necessary follow-up is necessary for me to also answer the hard questions that I'm asking of the men I'm talking to. And so, again, it's one thing to ask the question, and we need to, but also, even if they don't ask me back, like, I just begin to divulge kind of the answers to the same thing that I interviewed them about. But
yeah, so you create an environment where they also ask those questions of you.
Yeah, and some of it is just part of part of the hard difficulty of being a pastor, because
Yeah.
so many times for us in our shoes, it feels like we're always caring about the spiritual well-being of the other person, the emotional well-being of the people that are part of our church. And there is definitely vulnerability there, but the willingness to kind of follow that up, knowing that this is a brother. Sometimes the relationship of pastor and church member can be this complicated thing, but we're all brothers. There's no question. And being willing to dig deep in your emotions to the same place that you've just invited them to go to is so important. And
Well, and
something I like to do.
it's something I think I've seen in all of you, and it's one of the things I value about I think our culture here is that we as leaders try to model being vulnerable about our own humanness and our own struggles, because I mean we're human, we're pastors, but we're human beings too, and we have our own vulnerabilities and struggles. And the more that we can open up about that, the more I think we invite the people around us to be honest about what they're going through as well. And that kind of happened. Before we start recording, Joe, you asked, we're going to talk about this or not, but this is a bit of a delayed podcast for a variety of reasons. But one of them was we were scheduled to record, and I just was at kind of an emotional, difficult, I just felt done. I just was emotionally, there's a lot of background stuff. Beth and I had a really hard day talking about an issue. I keep bumping this table and shaking it here. But anyway, and believe it or not, Beth and I sometimes struggle. We have these tense days and hard days, and we had one of them. And anyway, there's just a lot there. And I'm like, Beth, I just don't have the energy to do this podcast. And everything in me wanted to just say, I'm sick. To not be honest and just say, I'm not feeling that. The easiest thing for me, I'm just not feeling well. And it took everything in me, even though you guys are the safest people in my life, to say emotionally, I'm not doing well. And I am grateful that we've cultivated a culture here on staff where we can be honest and share some of those things and not feel like, somehow that makes me less of a man if I say, I can't emotionally do this today or tomorrow.
Well, I for one definitely appreciated that message when it came in. You just saying up front how you were feeling. You said, I'm emotionally depleted.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of modeling from not only you as our lead pastor, but us as pastoral staff and us as church men, to our society, is what it's going to take to make a change in how men are. The beauty of that and the strength that it took is something that we just don't, it's scary.
Yeah.
It's so scary to say, I'm struggling with porn. I'm struggling with I'm struggling with my temper. It's so scary to step out and to say those things. And it's like you go on a retreat and everybody's doing it. So it's like, oh, it's safe. It's fine. It's great. We can all do this together, right? But then to go home or to your workplace or whatever and sit down at a lunch table and be like, man, how are you feeling? How's your, that's a scary place. But if we can continue to model it with each other and for each other, it helps to strengthen the whole of us. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for that. Even though it was a tough place for you to be in and a hard thing for you to do, I do appreciate that.
Thanks.
But why is it? And I appreciate you also just saying that this is one of the safest places for you. I mean, we have a high level of trust, but why is it still so inherent in the heart of a man, in the safest place I can be? It's still hard to admit that I feel weak right now. I feel depleted, and I don't know that I can do this today. Even in an environment of trust, but that's real. It's who we are. It's this complicated journey. We're emotional beings. We're spiritual beings, and it doesn't always make sense. But
and one of the very distinct feelings I had in thinking about sending that message, I really felt like I'm letting the team down if I do this. Yeah. And so there is something, and the positive in that for me was I really value this team. I care about this team. I want to see this team succeed, And so it was a reminder to me of how much I value what we're doing and the importance of what we're doing and not wanting to but then again, I had to work through that no, that's part of us being a team together as we pick up for each other as things get difficult and work at that together.
Yeah, I think it's one thing for guys as well. A savior complex is a big deal. I know that's something I really struggle with as a man, is I want to be there and make sure that it gets done. And I'll sweep in and make sure, like, no matter what happens, I'm going to show up, and it's like, we're going to make it happen. Captain America to the rescue, right? Like, no matter how beat down I am, I'm going to stand back up and, go after it. And that savior complex of like, I'm going to be the one, like, we kind of have to let go of that. And to the collective group, we talked about, like, I think you were talking about, we have no role models of like the team or like letting go. I'm going to grit it through just by myself, right? And trying to change that narrative in ourselves of we're not going to let the team down by being vulnerable. Like, what were you, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that was great. Like for me, I just noticed that like a lot of times that when I have been open about what's going on in my life and the struggles that I've been going through, I've had people in my life say, we never would have known. Mm-hmm. And because you've been open, now we know how to come alongside of you. Mm-hmm. And there's like that moment when you realize, well, if I would have known that you cared that much, like, why wouldn't I have done this earlier? Mm-hmm. And sometimes just that vulnerability is what sparks where you realize you have way more allies in your side and people who are caring and are like, we want to come alongside you. We just don't know how because you have never opened up to us. Mm-hmm. And that just kind of broke down this wall of fear that I had of like, no one's going to care about me and they're going to be too busy. Mm-hmm. But then to begin to see like, wow, there were way more people that were there and ready than I thought. And it became a thing for me anyways to say, it's like, man, if I'm struggling, the best way I can advocate for myself is let other people know so they can come alongside. Scripture talks about like we are to weep with those who weep and we are to rejoice with those who rejoice. But if we're not doing our part in sharing that, how can the rest of the body come alongside of us in those moments? Mm-hmm. And even just as simple as the creative process, sometimes like the whole, I'm going to get it done. And sometimes that's not what's best. Mm-hmm. Like we need a team approach to be able to see a different perspective or a different idea or a way of understanding things that until you let other people in, you're only going to get one side of it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I've just began to realize that the best way for me to foster that kind of relationship is just to throw it out there and hope that they see the value in that and they would jump in with that. And sometimes I just have to put myself in their shoes. Like some of the best ways to foster that relationship is to get to know what's important in their lives and put yourselves into their shoes and think, okay, if this was me, what would be the things that are important and how can I ask questions that kind of help get that perspective out of them and kind of like do some investigative digging to kind of pry that out of them. And when I tend to do that, I begin to get to see a little bit more of the real them. Because if I just kind of randomly throw out questions and hope that they stick or they come out. At least for me, I've just found like, man, like what's important to them, and let's start there and see what comes out.
Has there been a shift in that? Because what you're describing is it sounds to me like a safe space where you're like you're vulnerable and a very positive outcome. Like people step alongside you. Is that different than maybe it would have been decades ago? Where maybe a pastor or somebody was vulnerable and it was a very different response? Like,
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I definitely think the value of it has changed. Like, I think there was a time where as a pastor, the sense was to kind of protect your image maybe in some way, or if there was, I don't know. Even culture didn't value maybe authenticity in quite the same way as it does now. And so, I don't know, this may be getting too complicated, but I have to wrestle sometimes with like, now that authenticity is a value, you can be inauthentically, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to try and share this way to appear authentic or whatever, but it's still maybe kind of a safer thing. I don't know. So it's definitely a shift in values where I think authenticity is such an important value today, which I think is great. I mean, it just creates this, you can't be authentic without risking a little bit of something, And so, I think it's shifted not for pastors and leaders, but across the board for people.
Now, what would you guys say because a lot of us we speak from an experience of a positive experience of being vulnerable in front of people, but I'm sure there are plenty of people who have tried that and have tried probably multiple times and have had everything but a positive experience. And what would you guys say to those people, like how to help them to navigate when all they've tried is they put themselves out there and it just falls flat? Like, you know, where they feel like nothing's going to happen now because I've tried so many times. Like, how would you coach them in their walk as they navigate the disappointments or the frustrations or the rejection?
Yeah, I definitely think, I think back to, early on in my marriage, I was secretly fighting pornography or struggling with pornography, eventually shared that and got more and more open about it. And remember thinking like, wow, this is going to be really risking rejection, and how it was the opposite experience. Like people just became super supportive. And if in taking that risk, if somehow I would have gotten the opposite response, that would have been so difficult to recover from. And, a few weeks ago, we talked about church trauma as one of our topics. And I think that's part of that, where people have tried to be vulnerable, or maybe they didn't even try. They just got stuck in a hard place in life. And what they received was not a place that was supportive and safe. And when I say supportive and safe, I don't mean like you can't confront stuff like that. It's just, but it's not with the sense of judgment. It's like, okay, we want to help you through this. So yeah, I mean, my heart breaks for people who have had that opposite experience. And, it sounds like shallow advice, but the only thing that popped in my head was just, don't give up. Like just keep pressing, find that safe person or that safe space where you can talk about what you're going through. And, we all need that for sure.
I think some church cultures create that environment where it's very difficult. And you said sometimes a pastor is concerned about his image, but I think sometimes churches as well, they're trying to hold up the pastor, and their expectation of him is to provide for the church community the example of what following Christ should look like in a perfect way. And in reality, you look at the words of David, all over the Psalms, he was this mix of emotion. Sometimes he was full of God, confidence in God and God's move in his life and the nearness of God. And other times he's crying out, God, where are you? Why are you so far from me? And we are this complicated mix of emotion. And so what we feel like, and I think what a lot of churches are beginning to demonstrate, is that you're right. Like just true vulnerability, honesty, and walking in faithfulness is what walking in faithfulness to God looks like. Bringing everything we have and laying it bare before him and allowing him to search us and know us, and so that we can continue to find, his redemptive purposes in our lives. And so all I'm saying is I think sometimes it's the inclination of the pastor and sometimes it's the culture of the church. But I think, like you said, if it's not safe in the culture of the church to find someone near you that you can still be, to answer your question, that you can still be real and safe with in a vulnerable way.
I love that we settled on the title "Not Alone" for this series, because I think that the bottom line, like, it's not helpful for anyone to be alone when they're struggling. It's just not. And I think we as men, because of cultural expectations, receive the message more, just deal with it. Just deal with it. And so whether that's pornography, depression, anxiety, like you name it, marriage difficulties, it's like we're more likely to just go at it alone. And so I love that we can communicate the opposite message, that all of us need others in our lives. And struggling alone with anything isn't helpful, and it's not very successful. So,
and I think imagining that the majority of the people listening to this podcast will be people from our church, I would say it's important for us to say right now, as clearly as we can, just thank you that we are a culture where it's safe, where the leaders aren't put on an artificial pedestal, where there's expectations of them that aren't realistic, but we're safe to be real. We're chasing after God. I'm not the same. I've been here over 21 years. I'm not the same person I was when I was hired back in 2003. Like I'm given the freedom to grow and develop my understanding of God's purpose for my life and for our church and the future. And I'm not tied to some artificial expectation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, so I wanted to spend some time talking about that the relationships, the emotional expression. Joe, I think you did such a great job of addressing that on Sunday. I want to get to a few other things too. This is such a wide topic. I don't even know quite how to ask this, but it feels like there's a shift just even in the definition of masculinity or manhood, or some wrestling with what does it mean to be a man? Like we hear the word the phrase toxic masculinity a lot. What is toxic masculinity? What is healthy masculinity? I'm curious maybe to hear from you guys, like what growing up, maybe starting there, like where did you learn what it means to be a man? Like what was healthy masculinity to you? Did you see kind of toxic forms of masculinity? And how would you define that?
It's tough, man. Because you have mixed messages like throughout life, from culture, from family, from church. Like what does masculinity look like? And I've been in church experience and faith communities where masculinity is one thing that's clear over here, and then other experiences where it's clear over here. I think in my own life, it's been a lot of examples of men in my life where it's like, I've gleaned a piece of what it means to be a man from my grandpa, and a piece from a boss, and a piece from my dad, and a piece from a pastor, and trying to weed out, the old adage, right? Eat the meat and toss the bones, right? So like trying to glean, and also very much from scripture as well. And like you so beautifully talked about Jesus and being that perfect man, trying to juxtapose what I see in scripture of who Jesus was and who David was and some of these great men of faith, right? And trying to like mix all that together. But then you have these voices that tell you that even some of those things that you're pretty sure are right are toxic masculinity or too much, or so like trying to find a balance there that's biblical, that's true, that's also like countercultural at the same time. And you're like, okay, what parts of culture are telling me the things that are really wrong with what it means to be a man? Like, hey, like this is something that men should not do. Okay, yeah, that's right. And what's just like way off in left field that you're like, okay, doesn't feel biblical, but culture is telling me this is what I should or shouldn't be. Like that's tough. And that's one thing I mean, throughout as growing up as a man, it's hard, and I don't have answers really, but just those are some of the things that I've done.
So part of it is you're feeling that tension. I think all of you like,
yes,
like I'd love to be a healthy male. Just somebody tell me what that is.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like what does it look like exactly? Yeah.
I think from my childhood, it's funny because this has a very clear line, but a man is somewhat, the thing that divides a boy from a man can throw a hay bale 6 bales high and not just stuck at 5. Boy, you learn what it means to work hard on a hay wagon. And I remember as a little boy trying to get it up 6 high and just not quite getting it. And then the next summer, and the feeling you get when you're like, now I can throw it 6 high. That's what a man was. On the farm, I learned a man is someone who works hard and never sits down until the work is done. That's just the attitude. And I remember not an easy lesson to learn. I remember sitting down before the work was done, and you learn very quickly. You keep working until it's done. And again, growing up without a dad, I think the thing that I saw early on is my mom moved us out into spaces, especially every man that I was connected with growing up, especially in the church, were people who were completely devoted to God. And so I really early on, in my mind, understood in a deeply real and emotional way that a God is someone who deeply pursues God's kingdom, God's plan for their life. And so there was something deeply spiritual about the idea of manhood from an early childhood in my mind. But even though I didn't learn a lot of that from necessarily the Stoic, family of origin, the farm that I worked on as a kid, but it was very soon became deeply ingrained in my faith. Like manhood is connected to pursuing God. It's something about manhood is connected to faith itself. And
yeah, I think one of you mentioned about like work hard, like in our culture, we don't have a lot of very clear, like this is, it's that 6 bale. We don't have clear markers of this is manhood. And a lot of cultures would have rituals and stuff that, you would go through that would give you that sense of, I've arrived here. And so I think that's one of the issues today. We have, more and more young men living at home with their parents, or just like what does it mean to launch into manhood? Like, what does that look like? Especially, there was a time when, the path was pretty clear. You graduate, you get married, you have kids, you're the provider. And now, like, people don't get married till they're closer to 30 oftentimes. And I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of questioning. Like, what does it really mean to be a man? And how do I get there? And what does it look like? And
And culture, like we live in a society. What is the popular phrase women have been using since the 70s? Women need men like a fish needs a bicycle, right? And we live in this culture where even the idea of manhood is so confused. You know, when at least the idea of provider and protector was something that was clear in our culture. Now, in our culture, that's kind of been removed. And what is the purpose? And some studies even show that satisfaction in marriage is very different for men and women. You know, some studies are showing that, you know, men benefit greatly from marriage itself. You know, they're healthier, they earn more in their career, they're more satisfied in life, and that's not always true for women. Women are much less gaining satisfaction from being married. They're highly independent. They're very strong. We get it. It's clear. The world has shown us, and so that leaves men very confused. What is my purpose then? What is the need for a man when fish clearly don't need bicycles, right?
Yeah. I mentioned the word kind of toxic masculinity, and that's been kind of debated some. It feels like on one hand, there's times where anything that seems masculine is automatically kind of defined as toxic. I love that you brought up testosterone in your message, by the way, because, you know, Cammie, before when we talked about women and mental health, spent a lot of time talking about feminine hormones and stuff and how that affect women. But you don't often get the same kind of talk about men, and clearly testosterone plays a huge role in masculinizing a child before birth, and then again in puberty, and some of the things that set men apart in a lot of ways there is more physical size, strength, aggression, risk taking. It's just kind of across all cultures. Boys tend to be more that way. I always want to nuance when I talk about gender differences. It's not all boys and men and all girls. It's a lot like height. Men tend to be taller than women, but men who are shorter than women aren't somehow inferior necessarily as a man. It just is that we have these trends that are different. And so men tend to be more aggressive, higher sex drive often. And those things, when they're just, I think there's a shadow side to those things. But if those things are just inherently pathologized, like aggression is just pathologized, like it's just bad. I think a lot of men then struggle with just something about me as a man is just bad. Like what is the goodness in me as a man? What do I have to offer? And I think especially young men may be wrestling with that today.
Is there, obviously when Cammie was here talking about like estrogen and women's hormones and stuff, there's a lot of research that she was going through and a lot of scientific study and everything. I don't know. Is that the case with like men and testosterone? Like, is there as much research around that and everything as there is with women?
Yeah, tons of research, and I just think it gets neglected more. The effect of testosterone, and women have testosterone too. Men actually have, I think it's estrogen as well. So there are pieces of different puzzles. It's not the whole story, but it definitely clearly affects men and their development. I think, I don't know, I wrote it down somewhere, but men have 10 to 20 times more testosterone than women. It's like this massive amount of testosterone compared to women. And that definitely affects who we are. It's one piece. So you take something like aggression, then the culture you're in will help shape the value of that aggression. Like what kinds of aggression are positive and what kinds are negative, but there's still a general tendency toward aggression. And that's a good thing. If you need a man to stand up and rescue you in a difficult situation, it's a bad thing when it becomes abusive. And so I think, there's tons of research on that effect of testosterone. It'd be interesting to have someone with more medical expertise, because it just like changes in women's hormones, it changes over time. Same for men. You get to 40s and 50s, your testosterone drops. It affects all kinds of things, from mood to sex drive to you mentioned starting to lift weights on Sunday because I
felt myself getting smaller.
Your strength it gets less and less. So there's definitely lots of research, and we just tend not to talk about it as much as women do when it comes to hormones.
That's why I love Jesus so much, because Jesus knew when to be aggressive and flip tables, and yet when to be gentle and tender when they brought a woman caught in adultery, and he made her feel seen and protected. And just the dichotomy of that. It's being masculine doesn't mean you just evaporate your aggression, but you know when to use it and with whom to use it. So he's our perfect example.
I love that too. I think of the scripture where Jesus challenges his disciples who were constantly debating about who's the greatest, and it's like, you have to be a servant. And a lot of, especially in a culture where men have physical size and strength that can give you an advantage, how you use your power communicates a lot, I think, about your manhood.
Yeah.
And you can use your power to serve and to help elevate other people, and you can use your power to make sure you're dominating other people. And I think that was Jesus' biggest challenge to those men was, look, there's a certain way we use our power that's different than the world. And we're not concerned about climbing up and pushing others down to get to the top. Whereas, okay, how do we serve and help elevate others? And when men do that, I think families are stronger, societies are stronger. And when they don't, it can get really, really ugly.
I think that's beautiful. That's so beautiful to juxtapose it in that way. Like using it to serve rather than dominate is such a good thing. I have a friend who complains that there aren't more messages about Jesus flipping tables. Like, why don't we preach from that passage more often? Like, how do we as men get angry? And like, it says in Scripture, be angry but don't sin. What does it mean to be angry and not sin, right? But like, Jesus was angry in that moment, and he flipped tables. Like, how do we know when it's okay to flip tables? Like, because to me that sounds a little toxic. But yet somehow in that space it was appropriate. And the thing that just rips my heart out is you talk about making women feel safe. Like, we have a culture that what Jesus did at the well with the woman is inappropriate. Like, it's not great for a guy to be like, that woman would not be safe, or like
in that culture, he really stepped into a space that would have been not seen in a positive way.
Yes. And to foster that in our culture, a couple of weeks ago, you brought up that list of guys that have like those leaders that have fallen into sin in various ways. But that's one huge way, is that women were not safe in the presence of this guy.
Right.
And like, how can we break that mold? Like, how can we be men that serve and protect rather than using our power to dominate and take advantage of? And like,
I think it'd be a fascinating study. I've done a little bit, but could do more of when Jesus used like aggression. Like, who were the kinds of people, or what were the kinds of situations? And from what I can see, it's most often it's people who had the most power that he was most aggressive with. It was the leaders, the people who had the most, and he was most vulnerable, soft, protective of people who had the least power.
Right.
And it's to me, that's been kind of a helpful guide, like who's kind of needs the most protecting. And those are not the people that you flip tables with, And I used to struggle a lot with the idea of a God who is angry like that. That really kind of threw me. I think having kids changed that a little bit, because if you mess with my kids, I'm going to get angry, and I'm going to fight to protect them. And there is something natural about injustice. Like, anger comes from injustice. If you see someone being mistreated that you love, you're going to get angry about that. And that anger is holy, and I think it's a good thing. How you express it may not be holy, but there's something in us, and I think in us, not just as men, but women have it too, but clearly in us as men, when this fight for justice, and it should make us angry at times when we see people being mistreated around us, and how do we use that aggression in a healthy way and not an unhealthy way?
For someone who thinks anger is not appropriate in that scenario, I just think replace it with anything else. If somebody's being mistreated or hurt by somebody, especially somebody in power, name a better emotion. It seems the most true to God's heart in protecting the vulnerable.
Yeah. Yep. And that was, I don't know, like, again, we talked earlier about emotions. Like, anger was like sinful in my life. I had to work really hard to get to a point where I saw anger as a healthy emotion that could be expressed in healthy and unhealthy ways.
Right.
And so what does it mean for me, a man? I'm not naturally, I naturally suppress anger as a man, the way I'm wired. So I had to work to get in touch with that side of me a little bit more. I don't know if my wife has liked my work and become
for a later podcast.
Another maybe topic briefly. I think work is a huge part for men where we find identity at times, and kind of what is healthy about that, what is unhealthy about it. What are your thoughts on when it comes to our identity connected to our work and the benefit of that, the risks of that for us as men?
I think for me, and I don't know if I'm on an island with my train of thought, but at least for me, I've been very cautious to put my identity in anything that can change, because I wrestled with that a while ago, in a time of ministry where I wasn't sure if God was calling me out of ministry or what was going on. I was just really like, God, what's next? And deep down, I wrestled with it, like, but if I'm not a pastor, then who am I?
Yeah.
And just that, I began to think about it. I was like, wow, I have put so much of my identity in what I do and not in who God has called me to be. And I think anytime we put our identity in things that can be changed or taken away, I think we've completely missed what our identity is. And I think for so many people who put their identity in their work and in their careers and in their job, they're putting it into something that is fragile, something that's not going to last. It's going to change at some point. But when we put our identity in who God says that we are, regardless, I had a good friend in college who went on to play professional baseball and pitched for the Boston Red Sox, and was on their run when they were, in the World Series. And in one of the playoff runs, he pitched a game where he was the winning pitcher, and they came back from, I think it was like 9 runs in the 8th inning, and he was the winning pitcher. And one of the Boston News came around him and just like, man, like, tell us about what it's got to be like, tell us about Justin Masterson, the pitcher. And he's like, well, baseball is just something I do. That's not who I am. I'm a child of the Most High God. But if you want to talk about, my job, that's something completely different. And that just sparked in something in me. Like, here's somebody who is at the top, and he still gets it. Like, this doesn't define me. This doesn't say who I am. It's just something I happen to do, something I'm happen to good at, something I can make money off of. But who I am is I'm a child of the King. And that just stuck with me so much that, because, with anything, I mean, in sports, you can get an injury and you're done. You could get traded. You could get called, and then what? And I think that's why so many people, they struggle when they lose a job or their career change, comes unexpectedly, and they wrestle with that, who am I? Because they put so much into something that isn't real for them. And so for me, it's always just been something as who does God say I am? Because that's going to be the same regardless of what job I do. And that's one thing that God, really pushed in my heart back then when I was wrestling with that is you are my child. Simply walk in that, live in that, be in that. Let that be the thing that drives you, because when I am at the center of it, how you live that out, in whether it's in family, whether it's in careers, like, you're going to be obedient, and that's what I want. And that just really changed my heart and my perspective of what I put my identity in, because there's so many things that we can put it in, and we wrestle with that in student ministries, where students, I got to be, a good athlete. I have to be, academically, at the top of my class, or I got to be the most popular, and they put their identity in so many things, and when all of a sudden they're not the top one anymore, everything comes crashing down, and they're, what's going on? And that's when they wrestle with not knowing what to do. And so, I think for me, it's, it's hard to separate ourselves from that. But the more that I think we put our identity into not in things that change, the more that we're going to see some consistency and stability in our own emotions and our own mental health, because it's something that's going to be consistent.
That's good.
It's good. When I think of work, like, I think there's something in us as men that's wired to get, well, not just all of us, like, meaning is important in life. People who flourish the most have a deep sense of meaning. And one of the areas we get meaning is work. I think God designed us that way. And how do we understand that there's a difference between finding meaning in my work and finding identity in my work? And that line can be hard sometimes. And I think of men especially who get to retirement age, and there is even if it's just, that was really meaningful, there can be a real loss and a real adjustment to what is meaningful now for me, because work was one of those things. But when it becomes part of your identity, it's a much it's a much bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Well, just as a culture, it's the first question we ask.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
After I learn your name, so what do you do?
Yeah.
We're reinforcing this whole idea.
And I don't know that I have stats on this, but I would guess that question is the question we as men ask each other much more than women who ask. I don't know that they go, "Who are you and what do you do?" necessarily, but definitely for us as men, that's the question. Like, what do you do? And I think it's part of the culture's emphasis on our. And again, you think back to when a lot of fathers and husbands, what they did is they provided for their family, and that was one of the important roles that they brought.
Yeah.
And so then it would make sense that your identity was, or at least the meaning in your life was more connected to the work that you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a very similar kind of situation to what Jordan was just describing in my life. Like, there came a point, I've been a worship leader for a long time, years-wise, not full-time, but I've been doing it for a long time. And there was about a 2-year span between where I stepped down from the prior church where I was serving till when I started here. And during that time, I was like, oh my word, who am I if I don't ever get to do that again? Like, that's been my thing. Like, I worked a job and I had other hobbies and things, but like, this is who I wanted to be. And it was like, the Lord kind of worked in me to like, you got to let go of that and like understand that our assignment changes through life. You have to hold your assignment with this open hand. And we have this idea in our culture of calling, like, oh, I'm called to do this or I'm called to do that. I kind of use the verbiage around like, we have one calling, and my singular job is to follow Jesus. Like, the call is follow Jesus. That's the identity. That's the who I am. And the assignment from year to year and season of life to season of life changes. Like, right now I'm a dad. One day I'll hopefully be a grandpa, like, I'm going to work a career as a pastor for a while. It may change in a decade. I may be back in the workplace, who knows, but to hold that with an open hand and understand the true calling is follow Jesus, become like Jesus, and he will give you an assignment for every season to find meaning in that. And rather than identity in that, my identity is in who I am as a follower of Christ. And even because men sometimes put their identity in their kids or their wife, and any of those that take the place of that high calling is unhealthy, whether it's our job or whatever. And I've seen all of those things throughout my life in different men from time to time, but just trying to stay, and I'm not saying I got it together and I'm doing it right. I'm just like, that's where I try to center myself, over and over again.
That's good. Well, it feels like in some ways we've just scratched the surface. But thank you, each one of you, for being willing to sit down and just have this conversation. And I know our hearts together are that this will help other men feel not alone in their own journey and be willing to take some risks with their own emotions and relationships. And I appreciate you guys as men. You're good role models for me. You're a safe space where I can be real, and I really value that highly, and grateful that we can sit down and do this together. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
yeah.
Well, thanks again for joining us for today's episode of the Maple City Podcast. You can watch for more episodes coming out on the Maple City Chapel app, and you can also find more information about our church, the events going on, the resources available to you. You can also join us on Sunday mornings at 8:30, 10, and 11:30. We hope to see you there. Until then, let's go and be the church.